Cool.
My birth name is Mildred Kandler. I was born December 7th, 1913, about 9 o'clock in the evening. It was an unusual birth. My mother was at home in bed, and the doctor came to check her, and he said, "Well, you're not ready yet, Mrs. Kandler," and he left. No sooner than he left, my mother started getting labor pains, and my grandmother happened to be there, who Ricky's named after. Her name was Rose, and Ricky was named Rachel. And she felt labor pains, and there was no doctor. He had gone. And my father delivered me. He cut the cord because I was the fifth child to be born, so he knew exactly what to do. In those days, you didn't go to the hospital. You gave birth at home with a midwife. So he cut the cord, tied the knot, and that night, I used to sleep at the foot of my mother's bed, or sleep with my mother in her bed, and my father slept in the bed beside her, alone. But that night, when I was born, I'm telling you wrong. I made
Go
a
ahead,
mistake.
just go ahead, start it over, go ahead, keep on
Keep going.
going.
It's fine.
Oh, so when I was born, I stayed with my mother in her bed.
Aw.
As each time she had a child, the baby stayed with her in the bed. I don't know what I can tell you about the birth. I was the fifth child, like I said before, and I had, at that time when I was born, I had my sister Tilly, Matilda, Sylvia was next, Eddie came next, Martin, and then Mildred came. So that beginning, then we lived in Newark on Bergen Street, 199 Bergen Street, the second house from the corner. My father owned the house, and I don't remember much soon after, but I can remember when I was a little bit older.
Stop. Go back to your parents and where they came from
Okay.
and how they met.
My mother when my mother was 13 years old, she and her sister and mother came to America because the oldest daughter in that family was already in America, and she's the one that brought them over. There was another sister that stayed. So they came to America, and that's when my mother was 13, and my father came from Romania, Bucharest, Romania, and he was about 17 when he came, and he was a blacksmith and a tool maker. He studied in Krebs, Germany, how to make all kinds of tools and be a mechanic and whatever. And he met my mother in a strange way, too. My father was a blacksmith and worked in a little shop nearby where they lived. It seems that everyone was talking about the young man who was so strong that he could lift a horse on his shoulders. His name was Philip. Philip Lewis Kandler. So this one day, everybody was standing around watching Philip work, and they said, "You want to bet he can lift that man on his shoulders?" And everyone said, "Oh, come on." So they started betting, and don't you think Philip took the man, put the horse on his shoulders, and stood up with it, and everybody clapped. And there was one man in the audience that was watching him, and he started to talk to Philip, and he says, "Are you single?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Well," he says, I have a couple of daughters, and I would like for you to meet them." So he says, "Okay." So he came to the house, and my father introduced him not to my mother, but to her sister, Sadie. And he looked at Sadie, he says, "No," he says, "I don't want to marry her." He says, "I'll take that one." And he pointed to my mother. So my father says, "No, take this one." He says, "No, if you want me to marry, I'll take that one, not her." Well, they did. They got married. And when they got married, Pop bought a little house, and he used to work for the shipyards. And he used to ride a bicycle from the city of Newark to Staten Island, which is still there. Staten Island is still where it always was. It's near the Statue of Liberty, near that wherever. What do you call that Statue of Liberty? I forgot.
That was,
What's the name of the town?
Liberty Island.
The Liberty Island in New York. Now, from there, the next thing I can remember only is that I must have been about 2 years old, the baby, and my brother Eddie, who was 7 years older than me, was taking care of me. And he took me across the street to a little yard in back of a home for homeless children. And there was a nice backyard there, like a little wading pool. And we sat down, and he had some apples with him that he got from the grocer around the corner from where we lived, who happened to be an uncle. And they were a little bit bruised. And he gave Eddie the apples, and he took me in his little backyard there, and he started to peel them. He had a little penknife, 7 years old, he was old enough to hold one, and he was feeding me the apple. All of a sudden, he decided that it was time for lunch, so he took me across the street to where we lived, and he didn't have the key to get in the house. I don't know where my mother was. He didn't have a key, so he climbed in the kitchen, because it was the first floor, and he came out and gave me a bottle. That I remembered all my life. People say to me, oh, you must have heard of somebody tell you that story. I said, nobody could have told you that story because they weren't there. I know this story, and I told it over and over.
How old were you?
I must have been about 2 1/2 if I was still on a bottle. George wasn't even born yet. If I was on a bottle, she used to wean us, after a year or so. All right, so that took care of that. The next thing I can really remember very clearly, I remember how the rooms were laid out. I remembered that we owned the house, and there were 3 stories in that building. And under the stairway, in the front door when you came in, that was a foyer, we used to have a sack of apples. Pop used to buy a sack of apples, a sack of potatoes, a bunch of onions, because we already had 5 children. So we had to have all that food. And I remember my sisters. I had 2 older sisters already, and my older brother Eddie, and Martin was already there. I was the baby. That was it. So then I realized that I didn't know she was pregnant. I was too young to understand it. But all of a sudden, Mom was having another baby, and she was in that same bedroom that I was in, that I was born in. And I used to sleep with her, so I was the baby. Every time a new baby came, they slept with Mama until they got a little bit older, and Papa slept in the other bed. So as well as I can remember, I knew that Mama was going to have another baby, and the bedroom, we were right outside the bedroom in the dining room, and there was a bed that used to open up that was for the 2 boys. The 2 girls had their room, and Mom and Pop had their room, and the 2 boys slept in this bed that opened. That was Edward and Martin. And when the baby was born, and I heard them say it was going to be George, so I was jumping up and down that bed, and my brothers were saying, George Washington, because he was born on February 15th. And my father said, he's going to be George, after the president. My father was very, very, very much aware of he respected the government here. And the fact that we had a president named George Washington, he named him George, for no other reason. And I was jumping up and down on that bed. George Washington, I just think that was the most wonderful thing in the world. And that night, and this is true, my father took me. My mother's bed was if you face the bedroom, it was on the left. She had the baby with her. And he took the bed opposite her, like another bed. And that night, my father took me in his bed. And I curled up on the side, and I curled up there, and he held his arms around me that night. In other words, I was no longer the baby, and he was holding me that way. And I remember it so clearly. I curled up and slept beside him. And after that rotten kid George, we were in the kitchen while having breakfast one morning, and my mother put a glass of milk on the table, a cup of milk for George. And it was nearby, and he was sitting opposite me. He must have been about 2 years old then, I guess. And he spilled the cup of coffee, and it went all over me. And this is I was born in about 1914 or 15. It must have been 15, when we were in that World War, the First World War. And there was so much sickness. Everybody was having the flu, and the hospitals were crowded, and he spilled me with the milk, and my mother had to run quick, and she took me in a little baby carriage and ran with me a couple of blocks to the hospital, because I was burned so badly that they had to put something on and some cloth on, and we came home, and boy, I was the star of the party because everybody was making a fuss over me. I still have a scar from where I was burned. And my Aunt Clara came and brought me 3 pair of silk socks. I remember it so clearly. One was pink, one pair, one was yellow, and one was powder blue. That was a gift she brought me. And I was sitting on the top of the dining room table when she came to visit. That was my mother's oldest sister that brought them to America. And I felt so, good about getting a nice little present like that. And that was all right after that.
Go back and remember the times you spent with your grandmother.
Wait, older. I was much older. We lived in Bergen Street that time, and we moved from Bergen Street to South Orange Avenue. And that's when my mother got pregnant with Eleanor. Are you listening to me?
Yeah.
That's the time my mother got pregnant again with Eleanor. I was the 5th child, George was the 6th child, Eleanor was the 7th. And she too was born in the house. Now I remember that very clearly too, because already I was 6 years old. And we had another house that he bought, a 3-story house. He always had tenants. They used to pay rent, which was his way of, like we lived for nothing. The tenants paid the rent, and that paid off the mortgage. So we always owned the house, no matter what. Tilly was already, the oldest one was already 16. Sylvia was a little bit, 2 years younger, or 1 year. Eddie was 3 years younger. And Tilly got mad at my mother because my mother was pregnant. She thought it was a terrible thing I got babies. I didn't know about that yet. I was too young. But Tilly got mad at my mother because she's going to have another baby. So, and then we were taking bets. Tilly went out with Sylvia somewhere, and the doctor came to the house, and he went into the bedroom, and the baby was born. It was Eleanor, and I saw her. She was all covered with that white stuff. Little chubby thing, cute little baby with a little round face. And Tilly came home from a friend's house with Sylvia, and Tilly says, "Oh, what did we have, a boy or a girl?" Because we were betting in the kitchen. The boys and I were betting my father. I was betting it was another boy. My father says he thinks it's a girl, and Eddie said it was something else. So when they came and we told them, we got another girl. So we had 3 boys and 4 girls all together when she finished, Eleanor was the last child. And let's see what else I can tell you. So we all loved Eleanor. There were 6 older ones, and this was our toy. She was spoiled. This was our toy. And then I couldn't sleep with Mom. George couldn't sleep with Mom anymore at the foot of the bed, and I couldn't sleep at the foot of the bed. The boys had their own room, and Pop had to sleep in the bedroom with the 3 boys. And I can remember when we were little, we used to have the bed with the iron, like wrought iron on the ends of the post. So every Saturday morning or Sunday when we were home from school, we would hold on to the post and lay in the bed, and Pop would pull us by the legs. He was stretching us so we would grow tall. We all had turns. No, that was none. He didn't hurt us. He wants us to grow tall and straight, so we used to pull our legs a little bit. He'd say he's stretching us. And Tilly used to play the piano. The oldest one used to play the piano. So then we weren't allowed to go into the living room except if company was there. We lived in the front part of the house because there was such thing as steam heat in those days. So we lived in the front part. So Tilly would play the piano in the living room, and we would be wrestling on the floor because when you went to the movies in those days, they played the piano. When they showed a Western movie, you see the people fighting in there, living it up. So she'd play the piano, and we'd wrestle like they did in the movies. Now, I had no place to sleep. My mother wasn't going to put me with the boys. My father was sleeping in the room with the boys. My mother was sleeping with Eleanor over there. So they went and bought a folding bed, a bed that opens up, and they put it next to my mother and father's bedroom in the kitchen. There was under the window where it's nice and warm. We used to have coal stoves then. We didn't have steam heat. So I had the folding bed to sleep on, and during the winter, it was winter time, because Eleanor was born in February too, February 10th. It's a funny thing. My mother had her first 3 children were born in July. Tilly was born July 1st. Sylvie was born 2 years later on July 25th. And 2 years after Sylvia, Eddie was born July 1st. The same day as Tilly's birthday. So she had her first 3 children born in July. It's rather interesting. Why? I don't know. Anyway, to get back to where I was, they bought that folding bed for me, and it used to stand there. My mother's bedroom was here, the boys' bedroom was there. And in the wintertime, when it was cold, we had an open porch on that third floor. We had two tenants on the first and second floors, and the wind would blow, and it would seem to me like someone was trying to come in the door. So I used to say to Mom, she was trying to. I said, I'm afraid somebody's coming in the door. I was 6 years old then, when Eleanor was born. So I said, Mom, I'm afraid. She saw her come here in bed with me. And then, when after Phyllis was born, and I was on that folding bed.
Eleanor.
Eleanor was born. I was still on that bed, so there were times I didn't want to sleep alone, and she was a little bit older, so I used to say, come sleep with me. And she wouldn't want to do it. And sometimes it was, for some reason or other, I don't know why, I'd say, come sleep with me in the living room on the floor. She said, why? I didn't want to sleep alone. She said, why? She was about 2.5, 3. I'm 6 years older, she must have been about 2.5, 3 by that time. And I said, oh, it's so nice. And she says, why? I didn't want to sleep alone. So I used to tell her, come sleep there. I said, you know why? Because Pop came home one day with a Victor Victrola, with the big horn on it. And we were so happy. You know, there was no television, no radios then.
Right.
And he brought home a lot of the records. So I figured out something real quickly. I was a smart kid. I said, look, if you come to sleep with me in the living room, you'll see what's going to happen. She says, what? And she'll tell you, it's a true story. I said, at night, when everybody's asleep, all those little people that make the music on the records that you hear, they all come out of there, and they dance here on the floor. That's what I told my sister, and she believed me. She was only maybe 3 years old at the time. I'm 6 years older than her, who knows? So she slept with me, and that morning when she woke up, she says, where was the people? Where are the people I was supposed to see? I said, my God, you fell asleep and you didn't wake up. I can't help it. So you missed the whole show.
Aww.
Then sometimes I'd take her for a walk with me. She was the baby, and we all made a fuss over her. If my mother was busy, wait a minute, when we lived on Bergen Street, one Thanksgiving time, people used to sometimes buy their turkeys and keep them in the backyard and feed them and fatten them up before Thanksgiving. So when we lived on Bergen Street, before the others were born, I forgot that, the bird ran away.
Oh my God.
So George and so Eddie Martin said, Papa, the bird's running away. Well, he starts running after that bird, and the five of us that were already living were running after him, after the bird, down Bergen Street, trying to catch it. And you know what? The whole neighborhood was looking at us and helping us. And we caught the bird, and we brought him home, and we killed him for Thanksgiving. Not only that, I remember, too, that when Father used to come home from work from Staten Island, he used to get a little metal can, like, I don't know what it was, tin or metal, and around the corner from where we lived, there was a saloon. And whenever he'd come home at night from work, he'd take me by the hand. George may have been a baby then. And we'd walk around the corner to the saloon, and I'd go under the swinging door, and I would always get a pretzel or a cookie or something, and I used to love to go with him. And I was a little tiny thing then. And it was really nice remembering those things. And then in the summertime at Bergen Street, when we sat outside on the porch, everybody had a porch. It was summertime, and we'd sit there, and at 9 o'clock, my father used to whistle. All the kids in the neighborhood ran home. When my father would whistle, it was time to go home, everybody ran home. All the kids in the neighborhood. Pop Kandler blew the whistle, we have to go home.
Oh, jeez. Funny.
And also, when we lived there was a woman on top floor, her name was Mrs. Norrie. She had a boyfriend, and he went across the seas when we had the First World War. And I was always up there, and she had earrings that were brass colored, and I thought they were gold. And I wanted to wear earrings, and she pierced my ears, although I never wore earrings until I was way up in my 20s. I never wore the earrings, but I wanted my ears pierced. And when her friend came home from the war, he brought home a whole bag of English walnuts. And I was rolling them on the floor. This is before the others were born, when I was a little tiny girl. And I liked that too. So anyway, that was a nice part of the life, and we all went to school. And my mother never had any trouble with any of the children.
Do you remember any special aunts or uncles?
Yes.
Was there somebody was there someone in your family that you were particularly proud of?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yes.
Let's hear that.
I had a lot of aunts and uncles. my mother had her sister Sadie, my Uncle Joe. He had a wholesale place where he sold cheese and butter and eggs, and used to supply all the small grocery stores. He had a couple of trucks going out, a lot of people working for him, the egg Kandler. And every summer, I was sent to my grandmother. She lived with my Aunt Sadie. They had a big house in front of the building, the brick building, where they had this business, you know, the dairy products. And the reason they sent me to grandmother, we called her Baba, is because my Aunt said used to take Molly, her daughter, one child she had. They used to go up to the mountains in New York, to Saratoga Springs for the summer, and my grandmother would be alone, and my uncle would be downstairs with the business. So she couldn't be alone, and she was very kosher. And come Saturday or Friday night, she wasn't allowed to light matches, to cook or anything, so I used to have to light the stove for her. It was all right for me to do it, but not her. I'd do her cooking. And in this big house, we slept up on the top floor. And when she wore a wig, because in the Jewish religion, when you were married, you had to wear a wig over your head. If you got married, you shaved your head and wore a wig. They called it a sheitel in Yiddish. And at night when we'd get in bed and we let down her hair, she had her own hair underneath though, it grew back, but she still had to wear the wig if you were married. So she let down her hair, and I used to brush it. And it was gray and dark color, like a salt and pepper. And I can remember brushing her hair every night we went to bed. I brushed Papa's hair. And we used to have a little oil stove there to keep us warm at night. There was no such thing as steam heat at that time. Started when I was a little girl. So every summer I spent with my grandmother. And I used to go to the girl in the office that worked there, and I guess I used to bother her, because she said to me, "Here, Mildred, here's 10 cents to go to the movies." So I used to go to the movies. And my grandma and I would sit on the veranda, the big porch, and the ice cream man would come by. She'd always give me money to have ice cream off of the man. And then, sometimes I'd walk all the way home from her house. Sometimes I wouldn't. I'd ride across if I wanted to go to my mother. If I needed clean clothes, I'd have to go home and get clean clothes from my mother, because I didn't want my grandmother washing my clothes, and my mother didn't want me to wash her clothes, my clothes. So that was nice too. And I used to be with her every summer until I was 14 years old.
Did you ever play with your cousins? Do you remember any of your cousins that you were close to?
Sure, I had a lot of cousins. My father had, oh gosh. My mother had not only Sadie, she had her sister Clara, who had 6 daughters. She couldn't get a boy. She never got a boy. 6 daughters.
Do you remember their names?
Sure. Every one of them. And they were very wealthy. Because when they came to America, there was a place in Newark that had 5 corners that met, and they opened a beer parlor like you used to see in Europe, because they were from Austria. My mother was from Austria. My father came from Romania. So they used to have this big, on the 5 corners, and everybody knew them, and they made a fortune. And they kept selling liquor until Prohibition came in. By that time, they were millionaires. By that time. I remember going as a child to see the trellis work outside with roses growing over it and all. I was in there once. Many years later, I met someone, a father of somebody I met that I played mahjong with, and one day he lived with her, and he was looking at me and he said, "What's your name, Mildred?" And I said, "Mildred." He said, "Mildred what?" And I think I was already married at that time. And then I said something. He said, "What was your maiden name?" I said, "Kandler." He said, "That's what it is." I said, "What?" He said, "I knew your mother when she was young. I worked for her sister, Clara Summer, and her husband in their beer parlor. And they used to call me Niggy. I don't know why, he was dark-skinned. And he knew my mother when she was young. He says, your mother was beautiful. He says, you look just like her." He said, "So I keep looking at you." I know he's always looking at me when I went to Ruth's house. I said, "What's her father looking at me for?" He says, "And your father is Philip." I said, "How do you know that?" He said, "How do I know it?" He said, "I told you. I knew your mother's sister and her husband and that family." He said, "I know your father too. He was a handsome man." So many years later, and I was already married. I already had you and Jeffrey when I met this man. And he knew my father, and he said, he recognized me. See, I strayed again from the story, so where am I going back? Oh, so Clara became very wealthy, had 6 daughters, they all got married. The oldest daughter was Jeanette. She married somebody who lived in West Orange. He had a pharmacy. His name was Julius Shank. And one of his customers was the man who invented electricity. Lived in his neighborhood. He came to him for his medicines, and he was a customer. Now, who invented electricity?
Was it Thomas
Edison.
Edison?
Thomas Edison used to shop in his drugstore.
Isn't that something? Okay, let's go back to this.
And wait, and I had
Okay.
more.
Go
There,
ahead.
there was Jeanette. There was Tilly Garfinkel, who got married to somebody named their last name was Summers. She married Garfinkel, and she had two little girls, Judy and another one. And I used to babysit them. They lived near us, and I used to love it. She had two little daughters, and called me during the summer when there was no school, and I was about 12, 13 years old. And she'd ask me to babysit with the kids just in the mornings. She had a maid in the house that did the cooking. And she'd give me a dollar or two for each. No, at the end of the week I had $10. She gave me a check, and I came in with the $10. And my mother said, "My God, you're a millionaire! $10 a week for just to sit with the kids and play in the backyard with them on the swing or in the sandbox." That was a lot of money years ago, and I was 12 years old then. So, and then after that one, there was two more daughters. Another one was named Molly, and they too were very wealthy. They used to go to Mexico on vacations and play a lot of golf there. And then there was Florence, who died young. She smoked an awful lot. She died, and then the youngest one was Ethel Summer, and she was in high school, Southside High School in Newark, and she was going to graduate. So one day I'm coming home from junior high. She was Martin's age, was just older than me. So coming home from school, I see my mother walking, red-faced. It's the summertime, June. And of course, I said, "Mom, where you going? Where you going?" She was all sweating. And she said, "Oh, I'm going to my sister. I'm going to Clara." I said, "What's the matter, Mom?" Ethel was killed. When I think of it now, the youngest one got killed. What happened is, her sister Florence's husband had nothing to do with it. Bill, she was married to Bill, a lawyer. But his car was parked on that hill where the high school was. And Ethel was outside. Look at how fate is. Ethel was outside with a girlfriend standing there talking. It was lunchtime, and it was down the hill. The car rolled by itself down the hill and pinned her against a tree and killed her instantly. I'll never forget it. The whole school was outside that house when Ethel was ready to be, when she was out in the fourth in the house. So that youngest daughter was killed. So Clara had 6 daughters. Well, I don't know who's living now, but one of her grandchildren is Florence, and Florence lived in California, and she now lives in New Jersey, and that's the one that Edward's staying with till he gets settled in New York. And then later they'll know who Edward is.
Aww.
Now let me see what else I can tell you as I go along.
Well, let me go through some little bit things here with you to make you recall.
And then, wait a minute, my father had a big family.
Okay, good. Talk about your dad's family then.
Oh my God, my father had a brother, Morris, lived in New York on Van Buren Street. That's Ann Kandler's father.
Yeah.
And then he had a sister, Annie, who had about 3-4 kids, and one of them was hit on the head with a baseball in the schoolyard and died. He was young, I forget, not Joey, no, I forgot his name. She had about 5 children, 1 daughter and about 4 boys. I don't know if any of them are living now, and I don't know if any of them are living. But Clara's children, I think, are all dead. My mother's sister's other. But my father had those sisters and his brother, and he had another sister that remained in Europe. She used to write to him very often, and I still have pictures of some of the children that belonged to that family. They used to send us pictures from Europe. And my mother's cousin is the one, my mother's sister that remained in Europe. I told you, she had a boyfriend there. Well, her son is a doctor. He was in France during the, what do you call it? He worked for the country. He was working with them. He was a doctor. What do you call that? The underground there with France. And he was the only one that wasn't killed in that family. They were all killed. My mother's sister, her children, and only David remained. David's the one that I visited when I went to Europe.
Your mother's sister?
No, I didn't know them. They were all in Europe. They never came to America. It was my mother's sister. Stayed there. She had a sister in Europe. I don't even know her. I never met her. But David was her son, and he's the one that lived in Paris, that practiced medicine. but was there during the war. He was an officer during the war, took care of the people who were injured. And his wife was killed, his mother was killed, his father was killed. And he got remarried, and he had this one daughter who got married, that I met when I went to Europe. I met her too, and she got married after I left Europe, because she sent me a picture of her. I have the picture in the album, it tells the name and everything. And David, my nephew, Tilly's son David, went to Europe to see him too, and David was a doctor. He went to England and he met him. So I went to meet him when we went on vacation. I'm skipping all over the place.
That's okay. Did your
And
family, wait,
I'll tell you who else.
okay, go ahead.
Marty Margolis.
We've got a long ways to go.
Marty Margolis was my father's sister Sylvia's son. He's the one that worked over in Saudi Arabia when they were building all those homes. He had a big job there. And then he came to live here in Florida, and I took Jonas and Phyllis and Ricky up there. Or Phyllis, no, Ricky went with me up there. I used to take them up there, and he gave them gifts for Christmas, and they saw the parade in the backyard. They remember Marty Margolis.
I'm going to go through some things, Mom, so we're going to, because there's a lot of things I want to ask you, so we're just going to go through them and try to stay with these things for now.
Yeah.
Did your family ever take any vacations when you were younger? Like, did you go any place special?
Oh, yes. Oh, my God.
Okay, let's do that.
We had a wonderful childhood. This I got to tell you. This I have to tell you.
Okay.
And before I tell you, I want you to know my mother never had any trouble with any of the children in school. When I went to that school where my brothers and sisters before me went, and they saw the name Kandler, they asked me, are you related to Sylvia Kandler? Are you related to Martin Kandler? They all knew us. All 7 kids went to the same school. What's the matter, Benny? Are you hungry?
When you were younger?
Before
special
Phyllis was
vacation.
even born, we started. We didn't have a car, but we rode on the trolley.
Before Eleanor was born?
Before Eleanor was
Okay.
born, when we lived on Bergen Street. Eleanor was born on South Orange Avenue after we moved. We got on a trolley car, and I was, George was already born. There were 6 of us, and we'd get on this car, and we'd all, my mother didn't have to pay for us because we were all young. And we take the trolley car way up to the reservation in South Orange, New Jersey, where people used to picnic. And we used to take lunches with us. Benny, go drink some more. Turn it off. Just a minute. Benny, you need some.
Okay, South Orange. you go
South
up to
Orange, New Jersey, and there used to be a lot of picnic grounds there. And my mother would make a nice box lunch for me. And the trolleys we went on were open trolleys. The sides were open. You got up the steps and you sat down on the benches. They went this way. And the trolley would run by the electric pole that would go up to the wires above. That's how they got their energy to go. Do you hear this? The trolley cars, there was a piece of thing that went up to a wire up above, and that's where they got the energy for trolleys to run, and they were open on both sides. Benches were in them this way, and you could sit on the benches and the sides were open on the trolley cars. I don't know how else to explain it. And we'd find a nice spot up in the country, and you'd see daisies there and different things. We'd pick raspberries or blueberries out in the country somewhere. And my mother put a tablecloth down, or there'd be a wooden place there to eat these things, or to cook, fireplaces and benches. And we'd have a real picnic outside. If we didn't go up there, we'd go nearby to another park. And there was a hill there, and we used to have fun rolling down the hill. All the kids, this is way before Eleanor was even born. There was only 6 of us then. And there was a lake there where we used to... You stopped when I was waiting? Is that when you stopped?
Well, I can't remember, but tell about that part, about when, with...
Well, we went waiting, and my mother used to buy other stuff, and we used to play in that park. Anyhow, I must tell you something I should have mentioned before. When my mother and father were married, and they had this little house together, several people that they knew in Europe had come to America. And every time somebody came that they knew, they would come to our house, and my father and mother would make a place for them to stay until they got on their feet, and my father would assist them in getting a job. They had just come over, and they were always ready to help whoever came over from the other side, what they called the other side, Europe. They helped them out to get on their feet. And this one man, whose name was David Goldfarb, became a very close friend of ours. He met a woman when he stayed with us, and my father got him his squeegee, and a pail and a chamois, and he said, now you go out and you'll get a job washing windows in office buildings, and you'll see it pays well. And sure enough, David went, he learned how to clean the windows, he made a good job, and later, much later, he was in business for himself and made a fortune. He had 2 sons that were very nice. Then there was another woman that came. Her name was Mirala. She was related to my mother as a cousin. She stayed with us, and she met someone here in America and married him. And that seemed to be what most people did. When people they knew from the other side, which was Europe, came to America, each one helped. And my mother was very kind. Many times people would come to the door and ask if they could have a cup of coffee. Vagrants, people passing through. And my mother never refused anyone. She'd call them in, give them a cup of coffee, a roll with butter, and they'd sit down and eat it, and pretty soon somebody else, maybe a day later or so later, someone else would come. It was one person told another, so they knew where they could get a cup of hot coffee and a roll of butter if they were hungry. So that went on for many, many, many months when I was a little girl.
Okay,
Now,
wait, let's get to something else here. Do you remember any special stories your grandmother or grandfather ever told you?
I never knew a grandfather. They were both dead before I was born.
See, that's important to know.
Both my grandfathers were dead. I am named after one. His name was Mendel. That was my mother's father.
Who were you named for? If it was a relative, did that make you feel especially close to that person?
Oh, I was very close to my grandmother.
The one you were named for?
My mother's mother. No, I'm not named for her. I was named for my grandfather, who was her husband. He was dead. You name after a dead relative, a grandparent, or an aunt, or an uncle, or a sister or brother in the Jewish religion. You name after a parent that's, not here, so the name goes on. But I spent many, many, many summers with my grandmother.
Did you ever cook with your grandmother? Did the house have any special cooking smells in it?
All right, now wait a minute. My grandmother always made what we called kirchles, cookies. And she made strudel. And she made her own noodles, her own pasta. And sometimes I'd be there watching her rolling out the dough, and she'd give me a few pieces of dough, and I would pat them so, making the cookie. My hands were dirty and they were black. But I was too little to realize. And she'd cook it along with the other ones. And she was a very good cook and a very good baker. And I used to watch her roll out the dough and cut the noodles, and it was really a pleasure. And then when she cut them, she put them on a clean pillowcase over a pillow and lay it out there to dry. After she made the noodles, rolled them out and let them dry out. I loved my grandmother. I loved her very much. And I can remember her giving me, every once in a while, I say, here's 5 cents for an ice cream cone.
Did your family ever say any kind of blessing at the dinner table? Did you sit
No.
down together at every meal?
Go back a little bit. You asked me something else. Go back a little bit. About relatives.
Let's see. Who you named for, if it was a relative?
My name was after my mother's father. He was Mendel, and in Jewish my name was Mendele. You use the initial. And I loved her, my grandmother, very much. And favorite relatives. Well, I had cousins, but I was not very close to many of them. The closest cousins we were close to was Molly Rothberg, my Aunt Sadie's daughter. And we were very close to Molly, and my father's brother's daughter in Brooklyn, Ann Kandler. She used to come to our house because she was an only child, and we were 7, and she loved coming to our house. She was always happiest if she could come for a weekend and stay with us because we were so many kids. And the same thing with Molly. She was an only child. She used to come to our house a lot. But on my father's side, his mother died when I was a young girl, and she was so different than my other grandmother, it was like day and night. She wasn't like my other. They were 2 entirely different people. My father's mother used to like real pastries, American bakery pastries, and sweet things, and she was diabetic, and she died. And my other grandmother was the opposite. She made wholesome, nice things, Jewish, nice strudel and cookies and entirely different foods with those grandmothers. And I really knew her better than my father's mother. Martin was named after my father's father. His name was Max, so they used the initial name of Martin.
Let me ask you some other questions. Some of these you've answered that I'm scanning through the book, and some of them you've already answered.
Then you go over them.
Okay, do you remember what your father's handwriting looked like?
Not very good. It's on the back of a picture now.
How about your mother's?
My mother used to write a laundry list. She used to send out the laundry with 7 kids. She couldn't do her own wash.
Aww.
So she used to write a laundry list. She went to school when she came to America. She was 13. She learned to read and write very quickly. But sometimes she spelled the words wrong. But she knew what it was, what she wrote. So when they came back, she could check it off. And Pop could write his name, but Pop didn't want to go to school here. He didn't want to go.
How old were your parents when they were married?
She was 20, I think.
20.
And he was maybe 2 years older.
So how long did they know each other?
I didn't ask. That I didn't know. But,
Okay, listen. Were you considered rich, poor, or middle class? Were times ever tough for all of you, or was it always smooth sailing?
Wait a minute. Ever since I can remember, my father always owned the house we lived in. From the day one when I was born, they already owned their own house. We always had nice furniture. My mother wanted beautiful things and she had them. We had nice silverware. We had nice china. We always had a nice dining room. We had the piano. Tilly took piano lessons. Sylvia didn't want to take them. She's the only one who took the lessons. And we never went hungry. There was always plenty to eat. Because any time company would come, my mother would have enough for everybody, even the company as well as the family. It seemed like she could always have more than what we needed. In all my life, we were never without anything that we needed. Maybe not luxuries, but we always had. Everybody had enough food. We had nice clothes. Came Passover. She used to line us up in a shoe store, take 7 seats, and we'd sit in a row. I remember the man, Levy his name was, and 7 pairs of shoes came for Easter. Everybody got a new outfit for Easter. Now you can't be poor and give 7 kids a new pair of shoes at one time, because Pop made good money. He was a very good machinist, a blacksmith, a tool maker, and he was very good at his trade. Worked for the government, worked for the shipyards. I even have one of the, something that says that Phil Kandler's the best tool maker they had. He can make anything for you. I have it. It's real old. It's tearing, but I still have it.
Is it a picture of him?
And yes, it's a picture of him standing in an anvil.
We should frame it.
I got the picture. It's falling apart.
So we should still frame it.
Anyway, Pop always made enough money. My mother was always home. She always had somebody come in. She had a pani. Pani in Polish means a woman. A woman used to come to us when we were on Bergen Street, before I was born even, and come in and do the ironing. The laundry went out. Do the ironing, clean the whole house for my mother. She came every week. We had the windows cleaned by the window cleaner. She used to pay the window cleaner. Now you can't be with 5, 6 kids, and you can't be poor with that.
How many years did you live in that house?
In that house, we lived there when I was born in that house. Martin was born in that house. Tilly and Sylvia were born somewhere else. I don't remember where they were born, but not too far away. But he needed the bigger house as the family grew. And George was the last one born in that house. I was born there. Eleanor was born on South Orange Avenue. She was the only one born there. Anyway, I started to tell you about something. What was it?
Oh, the window cleaner.
Yeah, she always had somebody. And this Pani that she called was more like a friend. My mother treated her like a friend. Pani had a son who was learning to be a priest. And don't you think, when he did learn to be the priest, and Pani came and was so elated, my mother gave her a cash gift and wished her luck, and she stopped working. She didn't do it anymore. Her son became a priest, and my mother gave him a gift, which was very nice. I remember she gave him money. I don't know how much she gave, but she gave him a gift for her boy. And like I said, people came from Europe. They had no place to go. They came to us. And we never turned anybody away. They used to visit with us later and eat with us, and it was nice.
Now listen, did your father ever have a favorite saying you can remember him repeating? How about your mother? Do you sometimes find their words coming out of your mouth?
Oh yeah, very often. I don't know what the favorite saying would be, but I know that my father spoke like an Irishman. where he worked, in the shipyard, in the railroad, there was Irish people. And he developed an Irish accent. Because I'll tell you later about what happened when we moved somewhere else. Somebody didn't believe that was my father, where we lived. We owned the house on the corner, and she saw me one day, and I was already 14, 15 years old. She says, "Where do you live, Mildred?" I said, "On the corner." She says, "You do?" She says, "In the Irishman's house." I said, "What Irishman? My father's not Irish." I never, oh, so she says, I said, "No Irishman." I said, "My father owns that house." She said, "Well, he's Irish, and you're Jewish." What do you mean he owns the house? "You're Irish." She said, "That man owns it." "No, he's Irish, and you're Jewish." I said, "Well, that's my father." She says, "He's an Irishman." So I looked at her, I says, "How can he be an Irishman? He's my father." So Pop talked like an Irishman. He spoke English very well. And he always came home with jokes to tell us. But one time, one of the Irishmen invited him over, and he came home deathly sick. The Irishman had made some liquor, and it was bad. Alcohol in or something. And it's the first time, from the day I was born, we moved in that house, I was 12 or 13 then. No, we moved when I was 12. My father came home sick. We had to call the doctor. He had to be pumped out. That's the first time I saw my father sick, my whole life. We had a big backyard. My father used to have a grapevine growing back there. Always a garden. He loved the garden. He used to make bird houses and put them on top of the clothesline pole. We used to have clothesline poles like the washout.
You used to make birdhouses?
My father made a big house.
Maybe that's why I love birdhouses.
An owl lived in there. An owl lived in that house once. And then the squirrels, I don't know what happened. The owl disappears and squirrels moved into that house on the top of the pole. Always had a garden in the backyard. And I gotta tell you too, when Tilly and Sylvie graduated school, they both went to work. And they used to give my mother all the salary. They gave the money. My mother used to give them money for lunch and coffee. And a little bit of spending money, she had the money. They had to help pay board. It was nice. It was a way to teach them how to not to, be too extravagant. Then when we moved to South Orange Avenue, when Elmer was born there, we also got a telephone for the first time. We had a telephone, and we moved into a house that had electric. This was, let's see, what year was that then? I was 12 years old.
So 25?
1925. We had our first telephone.
How about a refrigerator?
Wait a minute. No, you had ice boxes, no refrigerators yet, and no electric light. Our first electric lighthouse. We had gas jets we used to burn on Bergen Street. You had to light it with a match, a little gas jet. You had gas burners in those days.
One of the questions is, what do you remember having in the ice box when you were growing up?
When we had the ice box, a bunch of ice, that's why you had to keep your food, to keep it from spoiling.
Who delivered, do you remember any delivery man, a milkman, an ice man, a laundry man, an egg man?
We had every one of them.
Did you shop with your mother?
Just a minute. We had an ice man. Who the hell they think brought the ice? The ice man. They used to bring it upstairs and put it in the ice box. When we lived to South Orange Avenue, my father built his own pantry out on the top floor, and we had the ice box outside in the pantry. He built his own over the top floor. There was this, he came upstairs, he made a thing, and we had our own ice box. And Pop made his own pool table. We had a big cellar. In those days, they didn't have dens in the cellar. He made his own den. Because we owned the house. He had two other tenants, a policeman on the first floor, an Irish family, Connors lived on the second floor, and we had the top floor because of an extra room, and we needed the extra room. And one day he came home with a bunch of books like I never saw. Very good books from his brother Morris in Brooklyn, who had a second-hand store. People would bring stuff in. So my father saw all these beautiful books. I forgot the names of them, but some of them were very, very good literature. And a bookcase, brought them home to us. And we looked at those books, and boy, did we read those books. Every one of us read them. Poetry and good books. That's when I first heard the story about the little match girl out of that book. And something else I got to tell you. We'd come home from school when we lived on South Orange Avenue, and it'd be so cold out, and we had a stove in the kitchen. It used to burn coal in the stove. You didn't have steam heat those days. We burned the coal, and we sat in the kitchen. When it was winter time, nobody went into the dining room and living room. That was closed off. Only if we had company, and we'd light a heater to keep us warm in there. But otherwise, we didn't go in that part of the house. We'd come home from school on a cold day, and the stove was nice and warm, and we sit in front of the stove. I can see it like it's in front of me. We take off our shoes that we've got wet walking in the snow, and we put our feet in the stove. You know, on the door of the stove would come out this way, Phyllis.
I'm listening.
We'd put our feet, warm our feet with dry socks, and my mother would tell us fairy tales. Fairy tales, European fairy tales. To me, to Martin, to George. And it was such a pleasure to come home into that house. It was always warm. And so the minute you opened the door, you smelled, you knew what you were going to have for supper. She made a full course meal every night for 6, 7 kids and a husband. And I want to tell you how we used to eat them. We would have every night a fresh green salad, tomatoes, lettuce, peppers, onions, cucumbers, every raw vegetable, a big bowl. Soup. After the vegetable salad, we call that Vorspeise. And then soup. Every night of soup she'd make, because Pop liked soup when he came home from work. And we'd have either meat, fish, or chicken for an entree. We would have potato. It could be a baked potato, a white potato, a mashed potato, it could be a sweet potato, and a green vegetable. Maybe peas, string beans, carrots, all fresh food she'd buy. And even celery, every night we'd take turns making the salad. I used to make it because by that time I was getting a little bit old. I was 12 years old, and that's I used to help. And Martin used to help, Eddie used to help, we'd all help. A full course meal, and for dessert, we'd have fruit. Canned fruit, canned prunes, canned peaches, canned plums, you know, that kind you did. And it was good, and it was healthy for you. And once in a while, she'd send out and she'd send Eddie to the store, Sylvia, Tilly, and come home with ice cream. We'd have ice cream. We'd all sit around the table and have ice cream. And sometimes, like I said, one of us would have a friend come. There was enough for the friend to eat too. And one time, my mother had made a big bowl of stuffed cabbage like you never saw in your life. And one of my girlfriends who lived down the street came in with me, and she was smelling it. And my mother wasn't home. She left it on the stove to cool off. We sat down and we ate 4 stuffed cabbages between us. Came supper time. Mama said, "What happened to stuffed cabbage?"
Oh no.
Everybody loves stuffed cabbage. So, but when we lived on South Orange Avenue already, my father had a car. He bought a Buick. Listen to this. Eddie and Martin went around the corner from where we lived. The school we went to had from every nation. We had French children, German, Scotch, English, Italian, Polish, all mixed, but prominently Catholic people, Protestant people, Italian people. It was really nice. It was really a mixing pot. And of course, you moved in, there was a big reservoir. And you looked out, you saw this. It was on the hill like, there was a big reservoir, water, drinking water. And it looked like a beautiful lake. We had relatives from New York. One of my mother's cousins was instrumental in making Israel a state by itself. People used to come to him. This was Abe Rocker. He worked in the what is it now?
Financial district.
The financial district, and he worked in where your son works now. What do you call it? Brokerage firm in New York, and the one in New York, and people used to come to him with money to send over there, and he would keep it in a safe. In fact, it's written in the book by what was his name? The Pledge. In the book, The Pledge, I told David to get Jonas to get the book. It's called The Pledge, and the man who wrote it is, I know the name, all of a sudden I forgot it. Ask for The Pledge when he goes to the library. He collected all that money, and that went to help Israel. And when it was finally made a state, my grandmother and her sister, his mother, was my mother's sister, went to Jerusalem. They thought they would live there, but they couldn't live together. And they came back and they didn't like it. They came back to America.
Oh. Mom, listen,
What?
if now you could move back into the house you grew up in, just the way it was then, would you?
I think not.
Why not?
I live much different now, in a different atmosphere. We got everything here that we need. There we didn't have steam heat. We didn't have the telephones. I don't want to go back and live there.
Who was your best friend in your neighborhood? Do you remember a best friend that you had that you used to hang out with? That you used to play with?
Yeah, I had 2 of them. One was Rachel Saber. Rachel Saber. Her father was a furrier, and they lived right across the street from us on Anthology Avenue, in a big apartment house. Her stepmother owned that. Her father married this woman. Her name was Charmette. She had three boys, and Rachel had a brother who became a lawyer, and a sister Sylvia. And they were the nice couple lived there in that apartment house and owned it.
What kind of things, though, did you do with your girlfriend?
I used to get little pieces of material and sit on the steps of the church across the street, and Rachel would sit with me, and we both had little dolls, and a scissor and needle and thread, and we used to make clothes for the dolls.
Oh.
But not only that, I was the biggest tomboy in New Jersey. The biggest tomboy you'd ever want to see. I used to play shooters with the kids as marbles like this, with my brother's friends in the street, and my knuckles were always black from shooting marbles. And I used to play with the boys all the time. Shooting marbles.
What sidewalk games did you play? Did you
Hopscotch, jumped rope, hopscotch. But I gotta tell you something else would happen one day. George was fighting with this boy, Edwin, and his brother Stuart was there. Stuart was my friend. And George was playing marbles with Edwin, and I was standing there with Stuart, and all of a sudden they were fighting. So Stuart got mad because George was fighting with Edwin, so he picked on George. I said, leave him alone. He says, no. So I said, you better leave him alone. And he wouldn't. So I beat up Stuart, and George beat up Edwin.
How old were you then?
Those are my good friends.
How old?
10 and a half, 11. I couldn't have been more because
Oh my
we moved from
God.
there I was 12.
Do you remember collecting anything? Did you have any collections
Just
of
a
anything?
minute. We used to play picture cards. You got them when you bought gum or something, like the ball picture cards for the ball players, but we used to have no ball players on them. They were ball players, and we used to play with those cards. And you played a game with them. I don't know how it was, and if you won, and I won a lot of cards, and I was playing with Martin, and I don't know, something happened, and we started to fight, and he took some of my cards out here, and my father got angry, and he says to me, you can't play cards anymore, give me those damn cards. He took all the cards away and he tore them up, and I was heartbroken.
Oh.
I was heartbroken. Wherever the boys was, I was. If they played baseball, I played. One time in the schoolyard, this other boy jumped off a roof. I forgot his name. And I was with him. We both jumped off the roof. He broke his leg. I didn't. Stephen Haynes, that was.
Oh, yeah.
And they had to take him to the hospital. And I'll tell you one thing else. When I was in school, I was always teacher's pet. I can't believe it. When somebody had to recite something in front of the classroom, from kindergarten on, first grade, I recited, once a trap was baited with a piece of cheese. It tickled so a little mouse it almost made him sneeze. First grade, grammar school. An old cat says there's danger, be careful where you go. Nonsense, said the other, I don't think you know. So he went in boldly, no one in sight. First he took a nibble, and then he took a bite. And snap went the trap as quick as a wink, just because that little mouse, he didn't stop to think. I had to go over the front of the classroom and say that in first grade.
Oh.
Second grade, they put me on the stage in the auditorium with the whole school there, and I had to tell the story about Abraham Lincoln, how he had the store, and it was muddy and raining, and somebody paid him a penny over, and he walked 7 miles to return the penny. The whole thing had to recite on the stage, and Sylvie was sitting in the audience, and George was sitting, and Eddie was sitting, and Martin, and I was head of the stage. I was dying. And then when I went on to another school, when we moved, when I was 12 years old, to another school, I was and I never studied. I never took homework home when I went to the 14th Avenue school. But yet, I used to get marked 10s. 10s was an A.
Yeah.
I listened. The teacher used to discuss every topic in the classroom. That's how it was years ago. And I remembered what she said. And she says, well, tomorrow we'll have a test. So the kids would leave. The next day I would pass the test, and they didn't. I never did the homework. But I remembered what she said in the classroom. So when we went and moved to the new section in the bigger house, the 4-family house, in a different area, which was real nice, and I started to go to Hawthorne Avenue School, I entered the 8th grade in that school. So when I entered there, I didn't even do the homework. I thought, but the teacher didn't say anything in the classroom. So I had to do the homework. But I still got good grades. And the principal came in the class one day talking about something, and they asked a question. He said, I'm going to ask that pretty girl over there. And I'm sitting there. He says, that pretty girl. He says, you're new here. I says, yes, I am new. He saw the graduation picture. And he said to me, well, welcome to the school. And he said, the prettiest girl in the class. Everybody turned around and looked at me, and I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed, you have no idea. But I was a tomboy. I used to go to the playground in the summer. I used to play volleyball there.
Did you have any friends who went with you all the way from elementary school to high school?
No, because I
No?
moved to the new neighborhood. Wait a minute. No, we didn't go to high school.
Did your mother ever go to the school for any reason?
Did my mother what?
Ever go to the school?
Never, for any
Never?
of us. I told you, never. Never. We were all good kids.
Did you have class plays?
When I graduated elementary school, I was picked to be on the stage and wear a Scotch outfit. It was made for me, 4 of us. And out of the whole graduating class, me and 3 other girls. We wore kilts, and we did the Highland Fling on the stage. That's another thing. I was always picked. Then junior high school, I was picked again to be on the stage and do something, this way with the sticks.
Oh,
And my mother went, why was I always picked to go on the stage? I can't figure it out.
You were probably very outgoing.
I don't know. And then in the elementary school, the last one I went to, we went out. You used to go on picnics sometimes. The school bus would take us somewhere, and they told us to bring our lunch. So every time I went, I had a nice lunch. Finally, this girl says to me one day, I said something. She says, who makes your lunch? I said, my sister. She says, gee, you get such nice lunches. So one day she says to me, don't you have a mother? I said, sure I have a mother. Why? She said, well, your sister's always making you lunch. I thought your mother was dead. Sylvia was the one that always made my lunch.
God.
And you asked me something else. My mother used to tell us real fairy tales from Europe. I can't remember them all. But they were beautiful stories she used to tell us.
From a book or from her memory?
No, memory.
Mm.
All in her memory.
Oh.
And other things happened to me that were good. When I graduated and went to school, I wanted to go to art school. My father said, you'll never make a dime going to art school. I was drawing pictures at 12 years old, beautiful pictures. I used to stay up late while everybody was sleeping to make paintings even. But the reason I learned how I knew I was a good drawer because was in the 4th grade, how old would I be in the 4th grade? The 5th grade, or I must have been in my 5th or 4th grade. She skipped me the 4th grade.
10.
She skipped
Or
me
11.
over. I skipped the grade where you learn all the countries in the United States. They skipped me over that school, so it took me I never learned until later, the 48 states. I didn't learn that. And I had Mrs. Harder as my teacher, and I drew a beautiful, we were drawing, and I drew a beautiful iris with leaves, and that went down to the city hall. They showed it off, and my father went to look at it. And I started to draw when I was a little bit older than that, because Tilly and Sylvia had a party, and I wasn't allowed to go in there. They were already 7 and 9 years older than me, those two, so they were having a party, and I was 11 years old. And I was peeking in through the sliding doors between the dining room, and they said, get out of there. And I was peeking in. So Tilly or Sylvie went to my father and said, get her away from there. We don't want her peeking into our party. So one of the boys there, one of the fellas that was in the party, said, let us come here, come to me. I went to him and he started to draw pictures. He drew me a picture of a pig. He drew me a picture of an elephant. And I was so impressed. That's when I started to draw pictures.
Stop.